Welcome everybody. My name is Cedar and today I'm going to be discussing a little bit about the effect that music therapy can have on degenerative diseases. So when I say degenerative diseases, I'm referring to 3 diseases specifically. That is Alzheimer's, dementia, and Parkinson's. Alzheimer's is a specific disease that involves old age in relation to progressive mental deterioration. Dementia is a blanket statement used for progressive mental deterioration from any cause, and Parkinson's is when your nerves break down and eventually stop communicating with your brain in a way that lowers your ability to move. All 3 of these diseases are labeled by the CDC as incurable diseases. However, there are medications and physical therapy available for these patients that can improve their quality of life and even in some cases alleviate their symptoms permanently. However, a lot of these forms of therapy and medications can be very expensive. For instance, a year of Parkinson's treatment is on average about $3,000, and that's not even considering physical therapy, which can get into the tens of thousands of dollar range. A lot of these medications can also be invasive and have plenty of negative side effects, which is just something that, in my opinion, an elderly deteriorating patient does not need in their life. So what if there was a better way to treat these patients? Today I'm here to provide an alternative form of treatment, that being music therapy, that I believe can be a viable alternative to these dangerous medications. So, this brings me to my research question, which is, how can music therapy be used to treat, soothe, and stimulate Alzheimer's, dementia, and Parkinson's patients? I'm going to briefly go over what I mean by treat, soothe, and stimulate. By treat, I'm talking about a lasting effect where this therapy can have effects on these patients' mental and physical condition beyond just the session of therapy. By soothe, I simply just mean anything that can improve the patient's quality of life in the short or long term. And by stimulate, I simply mean anything that can excite their brain function beyond what it normally would be able to do. So before we dive into how music therapy can affect degenerative diseases, I want to talk briefly about how music affects the brain in general. Simply put, it has a great effect on the brain. In a study done where a patient was told to play their favorite song and their brain was scanned by an MRI. The MRI lit up in all 11 major parts of the brain, including the hippocampus, which is responsible for memory, and the cerebellum, which is responsible for balance, movement, and coordination. Obviously, these 2 are very pertinent when it comes to degenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, dementia, and Parkinson's, but beyond that, every single area of the brain can be directly impacted by music, which is fascinating to me. Another important piece of this, and something I looked into pretty extensively, is neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to reorganize synaptic connections, or simply put, the brain's ability to change and adapt to experiences. Essentially, the ability to teach a dog new tricks, in this case, an old dog. Studies have shown that playing and listening to music can actually exercise that muscle, and especially musicians have a much higher neuroplastic activity than the average person. However, this goes outside of musicians, and studies have actually proven that people who listen to music more than the average person also experience these exercises of neuroplasticity. What this says to me is that music therapy is not simply just listening to your favorite song and it makes you happy. It actually cuts deep into the brain and can chemically alter your brain function. Not coincidentally, neuroplasticity is actually one of the first things to go in an Alzheimer's and dementia patient. Before they show any signs of cognitive loss of function or any memory loss, they will lose the ability to learn, and they will lose the ability to change their perception of things. So, what did I research? When it comes to dementia and Alzheimer's, there was a big case study that I looked at that I based a good amount of my research on. This was a study done by a man named Gomez-Gallego that included a study group of 42 elderly patients with a control group of the same amount. The study group was subjected to 6 sessions of music therapy, each one-on-one sessions, and the control group was subjected to no therapy or medications. It studied a whole slew of different functions that the therapy can have, including anxiety, depression, orientation, memory, happiness, language, cognitive function, delusions, irritability, etc. There's about double that many that is studied. At this point, I'll mention that the mathematical formulas used to measure these things were very complicated, and I actually looked at it with Kyle at a certain point, and Kyle informed me that he didn't really understand it either. So that's about as far as I'm going to go to that. I'm not going to focus on every single one of these categories for the sake of time, but notably, after these 6 sessions, the cognitive function of these patients improved by about around 11% on average. That is very significant in my opinion. Their physical ability to use language and their ability to pronounce words actually increased by around 12 to 16% on average, while their mental health across the board, and this is one of my main points, improved by an average of 100% across the entire study. Every single patient experienced a significant and lasting mental health increase, specifically meaning happiness was improved and anxiety and depression levels actually went down. Another thing that was greatly decreased during the study on Alzheimer's and dementia patients was actually delusions, irritability, and negative thoughts in general by a whopping 16% on average throughout the study. And one thing that I'll also mention is that the study made a point to illustrate how these symptoms were not affected in the same way for every patient, meaning that the continuity was in fact that it all helped. However, for different patients, it did different things, and it didn't necessarily improve everything for one patient or everything for another patient. Certain patients would experience different improvements based on who knows. All right, this due to all these increases and the accessibility of music therapy in general, I believe this should be a frontline treatment for dementia and Alzheimer's patients. The other main disease that I looked at besides dementia and Alzheimer's was Parkinson's disease. Parkinson's disease, when I was looking at it, I went mainly through a study by a man named Mikado Sotomayor, and this study was actually a compilation from 6 different care centers with 598 patients total. However, across these 6 care centers, the patients were subjected to the same forms of therapy and the same measuring criteria. The main parameter for this study was gait speed. Gait speed is simply the amount of time it takes a person to walk in a straight line on a flat surface. As far as gait speed across these patients, gait speed actually decreased, and decreased means a positive effect, so it took them less time to walk, by an average of 3 seconds across these 598 patients for a span of 20 feet. As well as gait speed, the Parkinson's group also experienced a 100% increase in mental health across the board. Now, I want to take some time to express my slight confusion on a 100% mental health increase and how exactly that's measured. However, it doesn't necessarily distract from the point that these patients' mental health was improved across the board. As well as those two, the study also looked at motor function, balance, and freezing of gait. Freezing of gait is simply defined as a patient wanting to move, but they cannot. If I wanted to take a step like this, but my body would not let me do that, that would be a freezing of gait. Freezing of gait was decreased in some patients, but in not all, in this study. Motor function and balance were also positively affected in some patients, but not all, but not necessarily as prevalently as you might think. The treatment for Parkinson's disease did not necessarily have any lasting effects beyond the therapy. However, I don't believe that this makes it irrelevant in any way. With how accessible music is these days, it's not unbelievable for me to imagine an elderly patient that walks around with an earbud in at all times, or at most times. And if they did so and it helped them in this way, then I think that could be a helpful thing for their life. It's also mentioned in this study that physical activity from patient to patient across the board improved, but varied in certain ways, meaning that some patients essentially had more activity stimulated in the upper body while some had more in the lower body. And it kind of was just a case-by-case basis. So, all this is well and good, but why is this relevant? So I want to start this section by saying that I recommend larger study groups and studies for both of these diseases. I would like to see, for Alzheimer's and dementia and Parkinson's each, I would like to see a study group of at least 2,000 with a control group of the same size. I think that would shed a lot more light into how these are really affecting the patients and really just give a clearer picture overall of how it affects the brain. This brings me to my main claim. My main claim is that music therapy should be the first and frontline treatment in all cases of Alzheimer's, dementia, and Parkinson's, no matter how advanced. This is because Compared to other medications, music therapy is cheap, uninvasive, fun, and increases mental health across the board. I believe that some form of music therapy can help a patient in every case, and if not, it is not going to negatively impact them. This also comes into play where some families simply cannot make care for a degenerative patient possible. Because these diseases are incurable, I want you to think of maybe a single parent household who has children and maybe has a grandparent living with them. They can't pay $3,000 a year or more for something that is eventually going to be inevitable. So this brings me to the point that music therapy should be implemented in some way, shape, or form for every one of these patients, and I will get back to that later in the presentation. I also recommend the study of the use of music therapy on other mental conditions such as autism, anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, etc., anything you can think of. I can't guarantee that it'll work, obviously. However, since it cuts so deep into the brain and obviously has a lasting effect on people's neuroplasticity and their brain function in general, I believe that it could easily be a very relevant treatment for plenty of mental conditions out there. Finally, I'd like to recommend the use of at-home therapy for any one of you that might have a degenerative family member. I'm going to briefly go into how you can do that at your house and demonstrate the fact that even if you cannot afford a clinical music therapist, the fundamentals of this therapy can still be implemented in your daily life. So, I'm going to briefly go over how all of you can demonstrate music therapy for your elderly Alzheimer's and dementia patient, and also for your elderly Parkinson's patient. So, for Alzheimer's and dementia, I want you to get your elderly family member, simply sit down on the couch with them. The only things that you're going to need is some device that can play music, whether that be a speaker or headphones or anything of that sort, and you need to know a piece of music that was important to them in their past. You're going to sit down on the couch with this person, you're going to play that piece of music, and immediately as you play the music, you're going to see increased brain function through the eyes, through the mouth, through emotional and physical responses. You're likely going to see them hum or sing along to the song, even if you did not think that was possible. And then, before you know it, the song is over. That is where the real magic begins. For a period of at least 10 minutes after, they are going to have a significantly heightened function in their brain to the point that they can answer questions and have conversations with you that they would not previously be able to have. For instance, these patients will probably be able to recount events from the time in their life that they were listening to this music. Whether that be 50 years ago, 20 years ago, it doesn't necessarily matter. Even if they don't even remember who you are, there is a very good chance that once that music is played, if they had a relationship with that song in a time when they did know who you are, there is a good chance that they are going to remember. And that is incredible to me. Some parameters for this, for Alzheimer's and dementia, there's really only a few. Of course, it needs to be a recognizable piece of music to them, something that is important to them. And really the only other relevant detail is that it needs to be a safe and loving environment. I would only try to do this with a close family member or, maybe a close friend if you've known them for a very long time. So this brings me into the use of at-home music therapy as it can be recommended for a Parkinson's patient. For Parkinson's, it's a little less cut and dry what I would recommend to do with them. However, I watched a documentary earlier this year where a Parkinson's patient who was completely wheelchair bound, had absolutely no movement in their lower body voluntarily besides spasms. She was played a song from, I think it was about in her 30s, and this lady used to be a dancer. And she was suddenly able to dance to that song with slight help from a partner. And I don't mean the partner is holding them, I mean they're providing the same amount of support that a dance partner would have for a normal person. So, as far as at-home music therapy for a Parkinson's patient, it could be slightly dangerous, is one disclaimer that I'll give, and I would not recommend doing this with your Parkinson's patient relative if they are fully wheelchair bound, just for the sake that they could fall over and injure themselves. However, what you can do is play a song that you know they love and just encourage some type of movement with them. If they're in a wheelchair, you can have them move their arms, and if they are not, then you can have them get up and maybe try to shuffle around and move to the rhythm with you. In Parkinson's treatment, it's a little bit less about the mental connection to the music and more about the rhythmic stimulation of the body. So, my final claim, essentially, is that music therapy in some way, shape, or form should be the frontline therapy before any medication, before any physical therapy on a patient. And if you have a degenerative patient and you can't afford and you can't support their treatment, I would strongly consider looking into using some form of improvised music therapy at home. Thank you.